All right, friends. Friends, I think we're together back for Ed Talk number 2. My name is John Vest, and I am very happy to be back here in Chicago. As Roberta mentioned, I served here for a long time at 2 different churches. I lived here for 16 years altogether, which was most of my adult life, and spent a lot of good times here. I got my theological education here, cut my teeth in ministry here, met my wife and started our family here, grew a lot more gray hair here. So it's good to be back. I'm glad it's actually warm for Chicago. But now I live in Richmond, Virginia, and I teach at Union Presbyterian Seminary. Do we have any Union or PSCE alums in the house? Yes. Now, I'm pleased to say that God is, in fact, doing a new thing in Richmond and at Union. We're actually talking about evangelism. Yes, that dreaded E word that Presbyterians and mainline Protestants don't like to talk about. I'm the new visiting assistant professor of evangelism. I must admit, I never thought that I would have that word in my job title, but here I am. It's an exciting new position that not only involves teaching classes and organizing supervised ministry and internships for students to complete Union's new evangelism requirement, which I think is great, but also I do a lot of work resourcing and consulting and working with churches in the Presbytery of the James. In fact, this position is a collaboration between the Presbytery and the seminary. I hope it's a model that works, and I'm doing my best not to break it. We call this thing that we're doing cultivating a new culture of evangelism, and people are excited about it, but we have lots of work to do. So let's start now. You all have those pieces of paper in front of you. Grab a pen or a pencil and get ready to write. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to write a 2 to 3 sentence answer to this question. What is the gospel? 30 seconds, 2 to 3 sentences, go. All right, your time's up. Now, I'm going to be blunt, and you can share your answers with your partner or your neighbor or whatever when you get to the discussion time. If that was hard for you, as Christian educators, pastors, church leaders, if that was hard for you, we have a problem. Now, I know that sophisticated, well-educated Presbyterians like us want to say that you can't reduce the gospel to 2 or 3 sentences. It's too complex. We'll spend 30 minutes on caveats and qualifications before we dare to say something simple and straightforward about what God is doing in the world through Jesus Christ. We'll tweak our language and nitpick the details. We'll offer substitute motions to substitute motions before we call the question, before we answer the question, what is the good news? And if you're like most Presbyterians, what you wrote down may have been a very theological answer, a set of core beliefs, doctrines, dogmas, confessions. This is the language that we speak, but this may not be the language that the world most needs right now. This past summer at Big Tent, David Loling from the evangelism office in Louisville said something that really resonated with me. He said, Presbyterians know a lot about God, but don't always know God. Now, I don't know if you agree with that. I think it's spot on. For years, I've been making the observation that Presbyterians are infatuated with words. We are, in fact, as you know, people of the book. Actually, we have lots of books. Our worship services are filled with words. A typical worship service, a whole third of that hour is devoted to one person talking. Much of our Christian education is words. We learn stories and prayers. We write statements of faith. We introduce and nurture faith through questioning and discussions. We explore sacred traditions together. Presbyterians, and I think this is true of most mainline Protestants, are cerebral people of faith. We don't check our brains at the door when we come to church. We're serious about theology and history and Bible and current events. I love this about Presbyterianism. In fact, this is one of the main reasons I became a Presbyterian. As John Leith and many others have long argued and pointed out, a distinctive feature of Presbyterian and Reformed ethos is a commitment to the life of the mind as the service of God. But I wonder if sometimes we live in our minds at the expense of a more holistic spirituality. Because here's the thing, God is not an idea. God is not the words we use to talk about God. God's not even the words the Bible uses to talk about God. Ultimately, all the words that we use to describe God are metaphors, incomplete and provisional. Yet Christians spend a whole lot of time arguing about these words as if there is a set of absolute right words that we have to be using. But God's not an idea. God's not a concept. God is a reality that we in our 21st century world need to work hard to recognize, to name, and to experience. Now, I know that human thought and culture and communication is all mediated through language, so words are important. But behind the words is a spiritual experience that defies words. William James, a long time ago, called this the ineffability of mystical experience. And friends, that's what we need to tap into. That's what we need to awaken in those that we work with and serve. Now, that question that I began with, what is the gospel, as important as it is, only gets us so far, especially the way that most of us answer it. So here's some more important questions. How have you experienced God's presence in your life? What was the most important time in your life with God? What difference does following Jesus make in your life? Now, in her excellent series of books on mainline Protestant evangelism, Martha Grace Reese suggests that questions like these get at the heart of our faith and how we share it. Leaders who share faith have more complete, integrated, and faster answers to questions like these. Leaders who are fluent in questions like these are the ones that make disciples, which, friends, is what we've been called to do. Yet implicitly or explicitly, the faith question that Presbyterians and a lot of other mainline Protestants most ask each other is this: what do you believe? It's that basic question behind our Sunday school learning outcomes, our list of things we want young people to know before confirmation. It's the question that we ask confirmands as they present statements of faith and publicly profess that Jesus Christ is their Lord and Savior. It's the question in worship that prompts our recitation of the Apostles' Creed. It's what we ask candidates for ordination. It's the reason that half of our Constitution is a book of confessions. But a much more important question is this: how do you know that God is real? Now, through my years of leading confirmation, I developed a series of questions that I would ask each of our confirmands in a one-on-one meeting before we presented them to the session. I told them I wasn't looking for any particular answer. It wasn't a test. I simply wanted to hear them talk about their faith in their own words. And I always began with this question: how do you know God is real? Now, almost all of them would respond something to the effect of, well, we can't actually know. We can't prove it. That's why we call it faith. Right now, that's a developmentally appropriate answer for an adolescent. But as we mature in faith, I think it's critical to push back against that answer, because faith isn't believing in an unbelievable story. It isn't about believing something that can't be proven. If that's all it is, why choose one unbelievable story over any other unbelievable story? I'm convinced that transformative spirituality is rooted in experience. And I'm convinced, where I sit now, that evangelism is about articulating that experience in compelling ways that just might resonate with other people. Now, like many people, I've been geeking out over Star Wars for the past several months, right? And I don't know about you, I love the new movie. And one of the things I love the most about it is how Han Solo is the linchpin that bridges the original trilogy and the new sequels. He's the key that passes on the tradition from one generation to the next. And I love the way that this is portrayed in him as a spiritual transformation. Now watch this scene from the original Star Wars, 1977, good year to be born, and remember how Han Solo is introduced to us in that film. Right, so Han Solo is the consummate skeptic. He's a materialist. He prefers the certainty of his blaster to the mysteries of the Force. Now, in the new Star Wars movie, it takes 30 years after the original trilogy. And a whole new generation has come of age in a time in which the stories of that original trilogy are only legends, only myths, right? They don't even know if Luke Skywalker is real. They don't know if the Force is real. They don't know if any of those things actually happened. Rey, one of the new heroes of the movie, says to Han Solo, "That's worth it, she's great." Says to Han Solo, "The Jedi are real?" And Han's answer says, "I used to wonder about that myself. I thought it was a bunch of mumbo jumbo, a magical power holding together good and evil, the dark side and the light. The crazy thing is, it's true. The Force, the Jedi, all of it, it's all true." Of all people, Han Solo is the one passing on the tradition to a new generation, right? What happened? It wasn't that Obi-Wan Kenobi took him aside on the Millennium Falcon and gave him a tutorial in basic Force doctrine. It wasn't that he sat around that campfire with the Ewoks and listened to C-3PO long enough telling the story, and he said, "Oh yeah, that finally makes sense to me." What changed for Han? He lived it. He experienced it. He knows that the Force is real because he experienced it, and it changed his life. And in the context of that story, it changed the whole galaxy. So friends, how do you know God is real? How have you experienced God's presence in your life or in the world? Now, I'm sure I'm opening up a huge can of worms here, but it's interesting to me that more and more the term Christian education is being replaced with the term faith formation in our job titles and in our programs. I haven't found anywhere in sort of the scholarly discussions of when or why this shift took place. As far as I can tell, it's not covered in the recently published Encyclopedia of Christian Education. Maybe there isn't an identifiable moment when this started to change. I did find that in 2005, the United Church of Canada, we have any United Church of Canada folks here? No, I don't know. There was one Presbyterian of Canada. All right, love it. In 2005, the United Church of Canada explored this, noting that the shift to faith formation is likely about distancing the field from a schooling model focused on ideas and doctrines as how we mediate faith. This is a debate, as many of us know, that goes back to the 1970s with John Westerhoff's challenge to the school model in Christian education. The United Church of Christ actually studied this in 2012, mostly by polling their professionals and their churches and congregations to see what terms were most commonly used in UCC churches. Based on their research, they plotted three terms: Christian education, spiritual formation, and faith formation along a spectrum that ranged from head knowledge over to heart wisdom. They concluded that faith formation is actually a mediating term that incorporates both of those elements. And now they, as a denomination, are intentionally using faith formation as a way to describe what we're talking about here this week. Now, I want to suggest that a different approach is what we most need today, and it's spiritual direction. Now, ultimately, spiritual direction, whether it's a one-on-one or in a retreat setting, is about helping each other to recognize God's presence in the world and in our lives and to talk about that. Now, I'm convinced that we need to be training our pastors and church educators to be spiritual directors. Perhaps more than anything, this kind of attentiveness to God's presence in the world and our ability to articulate and share that is what the church most desperately needs right now. Now, of course, we still need to learn the vocabulary and language of Christianity. We still need to learn the stories that shape who we are and how we understand God in the world. We still need to know our history so that we can better follow God into the future. But most of all, we need to remember that God's not an idea. God is not a myth. God is not a meta-narrative. God is a reality that we experience. God is a reality that changes our lives. We need to relearn how to recognize that. We need to relearn how to talk about that. We need to relearn how to share that with others. So friends, the question, how do you know that God is real? And how have you experienced God's presence in your life? Talk amongst yourselves.